Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now, here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Joe Polish, Roland Frazier, and Joe DeSena. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 27 years. So if you're a company that has software, a product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Tom Hazzard. Tom is an inventor with 37 patents and an unprecedented 86% success rate for consumer product designs. Tom is co-host of the Forbes featured Fast Growth WTFFF. It's a 3D printing podcast, as well as two other podcasts, Feed Your Brand and Product Launch Hazards, which were born out of what was his core business for many years, Haz Design, where he designed and developed over 250 products that generated $2 billion in revenue for retail and e-commerce clients. Currently, Tom co-created Podetize, a podcast hosting platform used by thousands of podcasters to produce and distribute their podcasts. And in fact, it's the largest podcast production company in the world. I'm very pleased to welcome here today Tom Hazzard. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks so much for having me, Rich. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And so you've been involved in product design for a very long time. So there's just a whole wealth of experience to share with people that are looking to develop a product, looking to take a product idea and bring it to life. And so you've seen every part of that journey, and you've been a part of every part of that journey. Where do we even begin speaking about that?
Goodness, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it my entire career, and even though I'm not fully doing product design development as much as I used to be, I'm still doing it for myself, in my own business. But I've just always had a desire and an interest. I've been designing, developing products really my whole career. And even in my current business, which is not specifically about product design and development, I'm developing products for our own company. But it's always been something that I just sort of dove in head first, even when I was still in high school and in college, with creating products. I've always been a very creative guy, and I sort of learned, yes, I was educated in industrial design, but I also just through experience, developing products, learned every aspect, not only of product design development, but of a company. As an industrial designer, which is sort of, I always describe that as somewhere between sculpture and engineering in a sort of simple sense, because you're designing the user interface, the appearance, the function of a product, but you're not really an engineer. You are an artist, but it's more commercial. But if you do it long enough, you see every aspect of a business, from the boardroom to the factory floor to being in sales meetings with big box retailers, dealing with every discipline in the company, marketing, operations, advertising, sales. You see it all. So that's probably what I've enjoyed the most.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I guess that's a really important thing to recognize too, is that product design and kind of turning a product into reality is partially industrial design, but it's also partially business. Really at a certain point, it's the product just becomes a thing on your shelf of your warehouse. It's designed, it's ready to go. Now the big challenge is getting it out into the world. And to a large extent, when you're getting the product onto the shelf of your warehouse, you have to be thinking ahead at all of the stuff that's going to be happening in terms of getting that out there into the world.
That is where reality hits you, because as a creative person, you may have a vision for your product, something you want it to be, and that may be very personal to you. But in order for it to become manufactured and successful, there's a lot of things you have to consider that are beyond you. You're sort of having to meet the needs of the consumer, what they want and desire. You got to meet the needs of manufacturing constraints. You got to meet the needs of pricing, the economics of it all. And it's really, you got to find the sweet spot between the needs of you, the creator, the manufacturer, and the consumer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's fascinating how any one of those things can have as big an impact on the final product as your initial vision, right? I mean, your initial vision shapes the product. But then when you get to a retailer who says, no, we're willing to pay 30% less than you thought we would. And now all of a sudden you have to shift a lot of how the product is manufactured, and maybe even some of the design that leads to that lower cost in light of that one demand. Like when you envision the product, you might never have imagined that was going to be the biggest factor in the final product, that what the retailers are demanding, but very much so, right?
Yeah, it is true. And, that's something that's very hard to come to terms with. And as someone in business, you have to make a really careful decision, informed decision as to whether you're going to agree to what that retailer might want, or if that's, going to result in a product that's not going to be successful. Do you take that business in front of you, or do you walk away from it? And it's not just a matter of wanting the business. I think, we all want the business, but, it doesn't help if you're going to spend an awful lot of money. And especially when it goes into a big box retail store, that's a pretty big bet where you're, going to make 5 or 10,000 units of something. You put it out there. If it doesn't sell at the end of the day, that's not going to help you, because they're going to come back on you. And if it doesn't sell, and want you to buy it back or do something else that, you may not be able to.
Right.
So,
and at the very least, it's going to cost you some credibility. Even if they don't demand the returns, that it's not going to help, as you said, in your words, if it doesn't sell.
Yeah, I mean, the best products, what I always say is I want to create a product that's going to be bought and used again and again and again. It's going to last over a very long period of time. And the only way that happens is if you provide a good value for the price and it really meets the consumer's need or desire. And the tough thing about retailers is a lot of the time they think they know what'll sell. They have an idea of what will sell, but they don't really know. There's been a shift, at least over my career. It used to be that a buyer at a retail store, that was like a career. And they were really what I would call like a merchant, knew their category. They probably, in the beginning of my career, that type of person did know better than me what was going to sell. What I've found in recent years is buyers at retail chains, especially the bigger ones, it's a rest stop on the way up the corporate ladder, and they really don't know. I mean, somebody who could be buying furniture today was buying office supplies like, copy paper and stuff the year before. Right. They don't really know the category and know the market. And so when they make a request, or if I might even say a demand that a product must do this, or it must cost this, or, they don't really have experience. And so that makes it a pretty risky prospect.
Right. So it's kind of like buyer used to mean savvy decision maker. Now it means more like legwork, of doing lots of research and lots of scouting, but not necessarily being the decision maker. Kind of like A&R, right? Like A&R used to be like the guy who went around and discovered bands, discovered what was going to be the next thing, and then kind of almost became like a manager of them, like just got deeply involved. Where now like A&R is maybe just like a clerical thing and collecting information for the music company executives. So maybe that's a little analogy.
Well, no, I mean you're not too far off, because honestly, in my career, which started in the early 90s until now, it's really changed a whole lot, because I've, a lot more things were manufactured in the United States at the time, even though a lot of things had shifted overseas before I started my career. But there's an awful lot more products that used to be made in the United States that are not anymore. Or I've also seen that they've used to be designed in the United States, even if people manufactured things over in China or, other Asian countries, they were at least designed in the United States. And then the factory was just given a specification, go make this, or give us a price on this. But it also, I've seen it shift a lot, where factories, especially in Asia, in China, are making and developing products that they are thinking and hoping will be of interest to the US market. And a lot of these retail buyers from the big chains, they'll go over to China on buying trips and really just go shopping for products in the factories. They don't actually put out like a brief of, hey, we're looking for this type of product that we want to sell to our consumers. They're not proactive like that. They're a little more reactive, going over there and seeing what they can find. Oh yeah, I think I can sell that and buy it.
Like they go to the Canton Fair or something and they look.
Right. Yes. Canton Fair, or even at other levels, big retailers like your Walmarts and Targets, they'll take groups of buyers in different departments, and they will actually go on tours and go into factories. They'll be maybe a week ahead of the Canton Fair or after the Canton Fair, in addition to it, right?
Yeah.
So it's becoming more rare that companies in the US will design and develop their own products and then just go have them quoted and made.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to circle back to something you said a few moments ago too, with we were talking about how a retailer might dictate some things about the product, and then it's up to you to decide whether to play ball or not. And I know you had told me a story about an instance where it had gone particularly wrong, and we don't necessarily need to talk about that one. I don't know if you are at liberty to, but I guess the point is there was a strong demand by a retailer that ended up derailing the process for the company, for that or for the manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I can talk about it. I'll try to not to make it too long a story, but it's a really good example. A big box retailer who has 1,500 stores across the nation, was buying a product from my client. And we developed this product, or designed it, I guess I should say. We contracted with an engineering firm to develop some electronic portion of this product. And it was supposed to be a plug-in product. You plug it in the wall only. That was always the scope and how it was engineered. And this was supposed to be a product that was going to debut and be featured for Black Friday. And this was in maybe 2006, I think. And so Black Friday, traditional shopping, I know so much of that has gone online now to Amazon and all that, but Black Friday in 2006 was still like one of the biggest shopping days of the year. And you would, retailers would bring in products as like doorbuster sort of things stacked out on pallets as you walk in, and they'd want to move through all of a product on that day if they could. And the retail buyer, about a month before the product was supposed to be manufactured, came back and said, we don't want it to just be plug in the wall. We want it to operate on rechargeable batteries. And, at the time I was very concerned about that. And actually, usually I would go to these meetings. I wasn't at that retailer meeting. Had I been there, I probably would have tried to steer them away from that.
Push back on it. And
yeah. But it was a meeting that for some reason I couldn't go to. I usually did go to them. So the main salesperson for the company was there, and a junior designer, part of my team, was there, who didn't have as much experience. And they came back and told me this, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I was nervous about it. And of course, the salesperson is like, well, we have to do this. The retailer wants it. You have to do it. You have to find a way. I'm like, this really raises the complexity of the product by an order of magnitude, because it's got to be engineered. And, we got to see, we don't even know how many batteries it's going to take. And now the timeline we have, we can't increase it because we have Black Friday, so it was a lot to do. Bottom line, company leadership required, yep, we're going to do it. And so we do our best, we go and do it. We contracted with an outside engineering firm to do the electronics, and they said they had the expertise, and they developed it, and we sent the spec to China, and it was manufactured. But we discovered the hard way I would say, pitfalls of agreeing to change your product at the request of a buyer, and especially without the proper timeline to do it. When this product was on the retail floor, they had display models. So they would, take one out of the box, put it on display. And we kept getting reports from stores here and there across the country that rechargeable batteries were exploding. And when I say exploding, I don't mean like kaboom, but, oozing, chemicals spilling out onto the retail floor of these stores. And this all of a sudden became a huge, huge problem. Ultimately, it killed the product. It was all taken off the shelf and the product was destroyed. And it ended up being like an $8 million loss for the company that I was working for. And fortunately, the company was big enough to survive that. But boy, a huge lesson learned. And ultimately, what we learned is the contractor we had hired to do the electronics, who said they knew what they were doing, really did a bad job. The battery pack should have been engineered a certain way, and it was not. And they were sending too much power in the charging circuit to charge the batteries. So, it was doomed. And had we left it a plug-in product, it would have been just fine.
Yeah. And I guess part of the lesson there too is that huge retailer doesn't necessarily know best. And their demand might not necessarily be the right path. Like, just because they're saying whatever, like let's have this in multiple colors, or whatever it is that they're saying, it isn't necessarily them knowing better. It could be a bad path. And that, like you said before, it's something that you need to decide whether you're going to follow whatever those demands are.
Sure. I think that's certainly one of the biggest lessons, is not necessarily to, that was a good example of where the company that we were working for should have walked away from that sale, said, I'm sorry, if that's what you want to do, we're better off not having this business. I don't need the sale that badly. Now that, of course, in hindsight is really easy to say. In that moment, that was not so easy. But the other important lesson that I just want to share, because I think it's really important, if you are developing an electronic product and planning to manufacture that, and you hire a third-party company who has expertise in it to do that work, you also need to have an additional company double check their work. that was the big lesson for me in design and development, is that, somebody says they know what they're doing. That's great. You have a sample and it works, but there's a couple things you have to confirm if you want to manufacture a product and make sure that it's safe or it's going to work properly. One is double check that engineers work. Have a completely separate engineer just who double check it, review it. Because this sort of stuff, it's very black and white, right and wrong, right? Either electronics do what they're supposed to do or they don't. So somebody else can review the work, the electronic circuit diagram, if nothing else, and say, yep, okay, that should do what they say it's going to do. And the other one is obviously testing that the factory manufactures it the way that it was specified and that that's correct. So just a few pieces in the puzzle, but very critical, especially when you're dealing with electronics.
Got it. Absolutely. And there's so much more we could talk about in product design. I'd like to talk a bit about Podetize. So that's I could say that was a pretty large size pivot. Although you had been doing podcasts for some time. So podcast is something that you knew, but where did the inspiration come from to create this platform?
Well, that's a fun story. So yes, product design and development was my entire career until just maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And my business partner and I decided to experiment with podcasting. We had an area of interest in 3D printing. Desktop 3D printing had, about, what is it now, 10 years ago, a little more, become very popular as actually some patents expired. And then it sort of birthed this whole little industry. And, we were interested in that and experimenting with it. And as we were looking for information on it, we realized, there's not a lot of information out there for people to, a lot of resources to help people with, desktop 3D printing. And, we were podcast listeners and there wasn't a lot out there. So we said, why don't we start a podcast and see if we can build a large audience. And at the time we were thinking maybe we wanted to start another company in the 3D printing market. And we said, hey, let's see if we could build an audience that we could market to. And so we learned the hard way how to start a podcast, researched it for like 6 months before we started it. And then we did. And as we did it, we had some really good success. We built our podcast up to having over 100,000 monthly listeners. And we had advertisers wanting to advertise on the show because 3D printing is a pretty niche market. So if you're a company in that space, it's a pretty good audience to advertise to. But we didn't just leave it as an audio show. We built a whole website around the podcast. It became a resource website. We created we developed sort of a process because my partner is a blogger or was a blogger back then of creating a comprehensive blog post for every episode. And we found when you create that from a podcast, it actually has so much SEO value. We got a lot more traffic to the website. Well, so we had a process we sort of dialed in for how we were doing this thing called podcasting and having so much fun with it. And as we did it, we had people we knew in business, people we network with or go to events and would see that saw what we're doing with the podcast. And they had seen we got written up in like Forbes magazine for growing a massive audience really quickly, that they said, wow, that's great what you're doing with the podcast. Can you do that for me? Like, if I start a podcast, could your guys who edit your show and do your stuff do that for me? And at first we thought, well, that's a neat idea. We can save some cost, on these resources we're paying and divide it amongst a couple people. Yeah, co-op it. And so that it started that way. But after it got to be like 4 or 5 other, podcasts, and we started having to hire more resources to meet that demand, it sort of started to change. And at the time, it's interesting. So my business partner is also my wife, Tracy, and she is actually the CEO of our company. I'm technically the CTO, is the way that works right now. But what it was interesting because we had this other business. I mean, we were making a full-time living on product design and development, and this podcast thing was an experiment, and we were enjoying it, but we were making a little money on it, but it wasn't enough to live on. And, she's saying, hey, wait a second, this podcasting, helping all these other people, it's getting to be a distraction from our core business. And there was this decision point. Do we keep going down that road, or do we focus on the core business? And I'll tell you, it was at a very interesting time in our careers where, we'd figured out how to make a living. I mean, the stats we have are amazing, right? 250 products and over 2 billion in revenue for our clients. It's probably even more than that now because some of the products are still out there in Costco and places like that. But we figured out how to make a living, but we really weren't generating a lot of wealth. It was a bit of a grind. I would, either Tracy or I would go to China every month. One or the other of us would go to China for like 10 days to 2 weeks.
So scalable. You're trading time for money.
We were trading time for money. Exactly. And somewhere around 2015, we realized we wanted to stop doing that. We had to find a better way. Because the other thing that would happen is we would, create a product that would do really well for a client. They were really successful. They grew their business, by many tens of millions of dollars, if not more. And then they would get bought by somebody else. And all of a sudden we'd be out of a client because the new ownership didn't want to work with any consultants that the old company worked with. It had nothing to do with us. It was all about them, right? And so we're like, well, we can't keep sort of getting ourselves out of work here. And then, it takes such a long time to get a new client. Like we had to change something. So around that time, the podcasting business that wasn't a real business yet was growing. And, Tracy says, well, we're putting too much focus on this. I'm like, you know what? I see an opportunity here. I think we need to follow this through and see where it can go. And then it became a different kind of experiment in growing a business. And I said to Tracy, if we don't do this, I'm sort of wondering what kind of entrepreneurs are we? What kind of business owners are we? Here's instead of designing a product, we've got a business here that we can design. There seems to be a growing market. It's pretty exciting. And let's see where this goes. And so she agreed, even if reluctantly a little, but she stayed focused more on the core business, and I focused more on the new podcast business. It stayed that way for a couple of years. But in 2017, you get to the point where you're doing this for, about 50 or 75 podcasters, and you've got, 20 full-time employees. We're like, all right, now we got to stop operating this out of Design, our consulting business, because that was all operating out of that. Let's start a new entity. So in 2017, about this time of year, we did started a new entity. And then about a year later, Tracy came on full-time as the CEO, and really the design consultancy is dormant, became dormant, and still has some revenue, but that we were deciding, okay, we're proving it. This is something Tracy and I always did with product design. We wanted to get market proof in a product. That's part, you mentioned the success rate or the commercialization rate of all of our patents. Right. That's largely because, well, number one, we don't patent things we aren't pretty confident are, worth patenting, but it also has to do with sort of putting your money where your mouth is and getting market proof on a product, making sure the dogs are going to eat the dog food, so to speak, right, before you go too far down the road. And so with this business, we were seeing we had market proof. It was proving itself in the podcast business. So we knew we were moving away from product design and development, and maybe that was a little disconcerting because our entire careers thus far had not been in that area. But so to get to part of what, as Tracy's podcasting and interviewing somebody, there's an interesting story about sort of two things: why we developed some tech in this business that really differentiates us. And then a new product that we're developing related to it is another interesting story. But let's start with the tech. I told you, we had this 3D printing podcast, WTFFF. We had 100,000 listeners, and we're selling, advertisers are wanting to buy ad space and promote their products or their brands to our audience. And, we're selling that to them. And Tracy says to me, hey, we're only selling that ad space on the new episodes we're publishing in a given month. Like somebody will buy for the month of June our new episodes based on those. But what we found with our statistics is 60% of our plays of our episodes on a given month were coming from episodes we published in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Tracy's like, well, people are listening to those now. Those are new plays now, but they're not hearing our ads for the new stuff. So our advertisers only getting value out of a portion of our plays. We're only making money on a portion of our plays. That's a problem. What are we going to do about that? And so, Tracy sort of drove me to figure this out. And we developed some SaaS tech so that we could, without having to re-edit every episode every month, we have software that can put ads into all the episodes and take them out or change them at any time on demand. And that's what we developed. And that's a big part of our tech with the Podetize platform that really starts to put us on the map and give us a lot more revenue opportunities.
Got it. Yeah. So you could dynamically substitute ads in older episodes. And so that was part of the tech that you rolled into Podetize. Right.
Yeah. I mean, before that, if you wanted to put ads in old episodes, you had to have an actual audio engineer re-edit the old episode and republish it. I mean, it's really involved and not worth the time or the expense, right?
Right. Yeah.
But if you could do it with software, it doesn't involve any labor and it happens in minutes.
Right.
Then now you can monetize all those plays and give a sponsor a lot more value. You can make more money. It's really win-win.
Okay, so to quote the Godfather, or the third Godfather, just when you thought you were out, they pulled you back in. So, so essentially, like, you ended up using your product design savviness to solve this software problem, this ad placement problem. But now, like, you've come full circle where you're developing an actual product to support what you're doing in Podetize. And this microphone that you've created, it's the Brandcaster self-recording microphone.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the second story I was mentioning, which is actually a more fun story. And there's actually a video that we created to tell that story. I'll have to send you the link so you can, put it in your show notes or whatever you have there. But so at this point, it's got to be 2 or 3 years ago now. Tracy was in Las Vegas at a cryptocurrency conference, and that's an area of interest of hers. And she had a podcast. We start a new podcast every year, each of us, so that we're constantly experiencing what's working today and not just what we did when we started the first podcast. So she had a podcast, and she had the opportunity to interview a lot of celebrities at this cryptocurrency conference in Las Vegas. And one of those was Gary Vee, who, probably most podcasters have heard of. And she got to interview some other people like Common, and she got to interview Steve Wozniak. I mean, a lot of really big people. But it's during the interview with Gary Vee that she's backstage, because there was a stage at this event, and she had very little time to be able to interview Gary Vee. There's all kinds of crazy noise going on because Common is rehearsing he's going to perform at this thing. So she had like 5 minutes to interview him. It was going to be the shortest interview ever. And she had some equipment, and to record somebody, unlike what you and I are doing now, connecting over Zoom, and we're each in our offices and using the internet. That's how a lot of people do it. But if you're going to interview somebody in person, you need different equipment. You have a microphone for each of you that these long cords connected to them. And she had a digital audio recorder that's recording to an SD card, actually a very high quality recording, but it's a lot of stuff to deal with. So she had just a few minutes to interview him. She pushed record on the recorder, but she had too much she's holding in her hands. It was kind of clunky. So she put the recorder on the floor. The cords are long enough. That's fine. Has this interview with Gary Vee. It was awesome. She nailed it. He complimented her. Wow, that was a great interview, and he does a lot of them. And he walks away. And then she picks up the recorder only to discover that the batteries ran out on the recording. Wow. And she missed the whole thing. And she didn't have awareness that the batteries ran out as she's talking to him because it was on the floor. Right. I get this phone call from her, irate phone call. She's like hopping mad. Now, not mad at me, but sort of mad at the universe, right? Because this took place and she had this wonderful interview that she's lost. And she's like, Tom, and tells me the whole story. Here's what happened. You need to do something about that. There's got to be a solution. And this is how a lot of things that we develop. Actually,
who's my chief technical officer over here? Oh, wait.
Yeah, that's me, right? Yeah. Actually, a lot of the things that we've developed have happened that way. One of the very first products we did early in our career was another thing that Tracy sort of had this need that I figured out how to solve. But this one, I was like, all right. So she's like, I need a way that I can have a microphone and I can give one to the guest and I can see if that battery is running low, something's indicating that, and it's going to let me know. And when it's recording, I know it's recording. And I don't want to hold all this equipment. I don't want all these cords. Can't you just do it in the microphone? And so, I start to figure that out and designed what is the Brandcaster self-recording microphone that it records to an SD card right in the microphone. It runs on 2 AA batteries. And it actually records a really high quality. It's got a built-in preamp. And, one of the things that if you do enough audio recording, that, all right, you have your microphone, you have these cables, you might have a mixing board or some other interface that goes to a computer. And every time you have a cord or a joint between a cord and a device, you have the opportunity for noise. You have the opportunity for signal loss. So I really found, wow, this is pretty cool. We're recording right to an SD card within the microphone. We don't really have any of those problems, and we can record a higher quality by doing that. But of course, then it's all self-contained. It's like a podcast recording studio right in your hand. So I've developed that. And then, of course, with the electronics, I practiced what I preached, and I hired a really high quality third-party company to do that, and then have double-checked their work. And this one's not as complicated because it doesn't have rechargeable batteries. I wanted to, for the use case, I don't want a rechargeable battery to run out in the middle of an interview and you have to plug it in to charge it. I want to be able to change disposable batteries and immediately continue that interview in seconds. So we're not
definitely don't want to be interviewing Gary Vee and be like, Gary Vee's like, what's that dripping onto your shoe? Oh, wait.
Yeah.
That's my rechargeable batteries.
Yeah. That'd be very bad. Well, so yes, that'd be very bad. Right. Gary Vee, by the way, was actually really understanding about the equipment problem. And, he invited Tracy to interview him again. He just couldn't do it right then. And it's actually a good story that, we continue to talk about, sort of the mother of the invention, if you will.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we also built some other interesting features into the microphone. Just as a product design aspect, we built in what we call a mic flag, which actually I can show you here like this, where you have, your podcast name or whatever is right on it, so that if you're doing live streaming video or something with it, you can promote your brand logo right on the microphone, kind of like you see the news crews have, you know?
Yeah, like a Weather Channel. And
yeah. But the way we designed
I made my flag out of styrofoam for my Halloween costume. I was a weatherman. And that styrofoam block for Weather Channel. But yes, that's when I learned what it was called, because I was Googling all over, like, it's like the microphone label thing. And I finally found that it was called a mic flag, but little, piece of Well, for some.
And, you know, before I knew that's what it's called, I called it a mic block. I didn't know any better, you know, a mic block. It looks like a block right on the microphone. Sure, we'll call it a mic block. But no, that's commonly called a mic flag. Yeah. And we make it so you can customize it. Obviously, you put your logo on it pretty easily. We have a way to do that. So yeah, so that's how I'm still utilizing some of my skills of product design and development with this podcasting company. But honestly, I'm a creative person, and it sort of doesn't matter to me if I'm creating a physical product or an info product or a software product. A lot of the principles all apply. And I'm having, you know, the great thing about podcast industry is it's hip, it's new, it's there's always something exciting happening in it. It's sort of modern tech, and it's growing in popularity. So a lot of the other products I did in the past were kind of in older industries that there wasn't a whole lot of cool new stuff going on. So I'm having a lot of fun with this.
So in certain ways that you finding yourself more in the center of innovation than when you were in product design. So that's
in some ways. Yeah. There was a time when we had a whole business that was in the personal digital assistant market. Remember way back the Palm Pilots and all that? That was pretty cutting edge at the time, but then it died. I mean, the modern smartphone killed it.
Yeah, even the acronym doesn't exist anymore. Like you say PDA, no one knows. It's a public display of affection.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Yeah, I think anybody under 25 won't remember.
Exactly. All I know is that right before my iPhone, I had a Trio. That was the last Palm device. It was so when the iPhone came out in June of 2007, I waited online for one, and that was the end of my Palm. My PDA journey, and I think for many other people too.
I agree 100%, and I'm right with you there. I was in line that same day in 2007 to get my first iPhone.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, I appreciate all of the great experience that you've relayed here. If people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how do they go about doing so?
You know, the best way is to go to my current company website, podetize.com. There's on the about page is some information about me and the other members of the company. But there's that. I'm also, I am on LinkedIn. It's not my primary social platform, but I'm certainly there, and I'm happy to connect with people. And let's see, there's contact information on the website.
The upcoming product is the Brandcaster self-recording microphone.
That's the new product. It's in development. It's not quite available. We are manufacturing it here in the summer 2021. It will be out probably in September.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing that. That sounds super cool. And Tom, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing all your expertise, sharing your journey, and some awesome stories. So thanks again, Tom.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.